Deep beneath the rolling hills and ancient valleys of China, there exists a world that sunlight has never touched. A world carved by human hands over 2,000 years ago, where entire cities sprawl through darkness, connected by tunnels that stretch for miles underground. These aren't natural caves or simple storage spaces. These are sophisticated urban networks, complete with streets, drainage systems, temples, and living quarters that once housed thousands of people. Tonight, as you drift towards sleep, we're going to descend into these forgotten realms. We're going to walk through chambers where emperors once hid their treasures, where entire populations vanished during times of war, and where archaeologists today still discover rooms that have remained sealed since the Han Dynasty. This isn't just a story about ancient engineering. This is a journey into humanity's deepest secrets, buried beneath the earth for millennia. Have you ever wondered what lies beneath your feet? Not just soil and rock, but entire civilizations that chose darkness over light, safety over exposure. In China, these underground cities weren't built by accident or necessity alone. They were masterpieces of planning, designed by architects who understood that sometimes the greatest strength comes from remaining invisible. Over the next hour, we'll explore not just one or two of these subterranean marvels, but an entire network of hidden worlds. From the vast underground complexes of Beijing that could shelter millions, to the mysterious carved cities of Cappadocia's Chinese cousins, to chambers so deep that modern explorers still haven't mapped their full extent. We'll uncover the ingenious methods ancient Chinese engineers used to ventilate these spaces, how they managed water systems hundreds of feet below ground, and why some of these cities were suddenly abandoned, their inhabitants disappearing without a trace. But here's what makes this journey truly extraordinary. Many of these underground cities are still being discovered today. Just last year, construction workers in Xi'an broke through into a chamber that archaeologists believe hasn't been opened in over 1,500 years. What they found inside challenged everything we thought we knew about ancient Chinese urban planning. And that's just the beginning. So close your eyes, settle into your pillows, and prepare to descend into a world where stone corridors echo with 2,000 years of whispered secrets, where the darkness holds stories more incredible than any surface city could ever tell. The story begins during the Warring States period, around 475 BCE, when 7 kingdoms fought endlessly for control over what would become unified China. It was a time of constant siege, when cities above ground could be surrounded, starved and conquered. But what if a city could simply vanish? What if an entire population could disappear beneath the earth, continuing their lives in chambers carved from solid rock? This wasn't fantasy, this was survival. The first of these underground cities appeared in the northern provinces, where the soil was soft enough to excavate but stable enough to support massive carved chambers. Local rulers, faced with approaching armies, made a radical decision. Instead of building higher walls or stronger fortifications, they would build downward. They would create entire cities beneath their existing settlements, connected by tunnels so narrow that invading forces could be held off by just a few defenders. The engineering challenges were staggering. How do you provide fresh air to thousands of people living hundreds of feet underground? How do you manage waste disposal for an entire city? How do you create light sources that won't consume the limited oxygen? The ancient Chinese engineers solved these problems with innovations that modern architects still study today. They developed ventilation shafts that used natural convection to circulate air through multiple levels. They carved intricate drainage systems that channeled groundwater away from living spaces while providing fresh water where needed. They created oil lamp systems with specially designed reflectors that could illuminate vast chambers using minimal fuel. Most ingeniously, they built these cities in modules so that if one section was discovered or compromised, the rest could continue functioning independently. But the most remarkable aspect wasn't the engineering. It was the planning. These weren't temporary shelters carved in desperation. These were permanent communities designed to sustain life for months or even years. Archaeological evidence shows that some underground cities housed blacksmiths, potters, weavers, and even schools for children. They were complete societies that happened to exist entirely below ground. The city of Derinkuyu in Turkey often gets attention for its underground complexity, but China's subterranean cities were equally sophisticated and far more numerous. In Hainan province alone, archaeologists have identified over 200 underground complexes, some connected by tunnels that run for dozens of miles. Near the ancient capital of Luoyang, ground-penetrating radar has revealed a network of chambers and corridors that may be larger than the city above ground. One of the most fascinating examples lies beneath what is now Beijing. During the Ming dynasty, Emperor Yongle ordered the construction of an underground city that could serve as both a refuge and a command center. The project took over 20 years to complete and employed thousands of workers, many of whom were sworn to secrecy about its location and extent. Historical records suggest that this underground complex could house the entire imperial court, complete with throne rooms, libraries, and temples, all carved from the living rock beneath the Forbidden City. But here's where the story becomes truly mysterious. In 1644, as the Ming dynasty fell and the Qing took power, the underground city was sealed. The new rulers, perhaps fearing that it could be used against them, ordered all entrances blocked and all records of its construction destroyed. For nearly 400 years, it became a legend, a whispered story about chambers beneath the capital that might or might not exist. Then, in 1969, as tensions with the Soviet Union reached their peak, Chairman Mao ordered the construction of a massive underground shelter system beneath Beijing. As workers began excavating, they broke through into chambers that clearly predated their construction by centuries. They had rediscovered the Ming dynasty's lost underground city. What they found astonished even the communist leadership. Vast halls with carved pillars still standing after 4 centuries. Drainage systems still functional. Ventilation shafts that drew fresh air from hidden openings miles away. And in the deepest chambers, they found something that made them immediately classify the entire discovery as a state secret. Stone tablets covered in inscriptions that seemed to describe other underground cities, not just beneath Beijing, but scattered across the entire empire. Maps carved in stone showing tunnel networks connecting distant provinces. And most intriguingly, references to chambers that went deeper than anything they had discovered, levels that the Ming dynasty architects themselves had found rather than built. This suggested something that challenged the entire timeline of Chinese underground construction. The Ming engineers hadn't just built an underground city, they had expanded and improved upon something far older, something that dated back to the very earliest periods of Chinese civilization. As archaeologists began studying these deeper levels, they realized they were looking at construction techniques that seemed impossible for their supposed time period. Perfectly circular tunnels bored through solid rock with a precision that would challenge modern drilling equipment. Stone blocks fitted together so tightly that even today you can't slip a piece of paper between them. Acoustic chambers designed with such sophistication that a whisper in one corner could be heard clearly across a room the size of a football field. These weren't the work of desperate people digging shelters. These showed evidence of advanced planning, sophisticated tools, and engineering knowledge that supposedly didn't exist in ancient China. The deeper the archaeologists went, the older and more complex the construction became. It was as if they were descending through layers of history, each level representing a different era of underground city building, each more mysterious than the last. But the Beijing discovery was just the beginning. Once archaeologists knew what to look for, they began finding evidence of underground cities across China. In Shaanxi province, farmers reported that their wells sometimes broke through into chambers filled with carved stones and pottery shards. In Sichuan, road construction revealed tunnels that seemed to run for miles in multiple directions. In Xinjiang, satellite imagery began picking up subtle ground depressions that suggested vast underground voids. Each discovery raised more questions than it answered. Who built these cities? Why were so many of them abandoned? And perhaps most mysteriously, why did the historical records contain so few references to what was clearly a massive empire-wide construction project? The answer, archaeologists began to realize, lay not in what the records said, but in what they deliberately omitted. Chinese historical writing has always been carefully controlled, with each dynasty revising the records of their predecessors to serve their own political needs. If the underground cities had been used by previous rulers as strongholds or treasure repositories, later dynasties might have systematically removed references to them, hoping to keep their locations secret. But the cities themselves couldn't be erased. They remained, hidden beneath layers of earth and centuries of secrecy, waiting for modern technology to reveal their existence. Ground-penetrating radar, seismic imaging, and satellite analysis have now identified underground anomalies that suggest China's subterranean cities were far more extensive than anyone had imagined. Near the ancient Silk Road city of Dunhuang, recent surveys have detected what appears to be an underground complex covering over 50 square miles. In the mountains of Yunnan province, local legends speak of entire villages that vanished into the earth during times of war, and geological surveys have confirmed the existence of large cavities beneath the areas where these villages supposedly stood. Most remarkably, some of these underground cities appear to have been connected by tunnel networks that spanned hundreds of miles. Chemical analysis of air samples from widely separated sites has revealed identical mineral compositions, suggesting that air was circulating between locations that are now days apart by surface travel. If confirmed, this would mean that ancient China possessed an underground transportation and communication network of staggering scope and sophistication. But perhaps the most intriguing discovery has been the evidence that some of these cities were never abandoned at all. In several locations, archaeologists have found signs of recent habitation, modern debris mixed with ancient artifacts, tools that show wear patterns consistent with regular use. Most puzzling of all, electrical cables and modern ventilation equipment installed with a level of secrecy that suggests government involvement. This has led to speculation that some of China's underground cities remain operational today, serving purposes that the government prefers to keep hidden. During the Cold War, both the United States and Soviet Union built extensive underground facilities for government continuity and military command. It would not be surprising if China had done the same. And what better foundation for such facilities than the sophisticated underground cities built by their ancestors? The evidence for continued use is circumstantial but compelling. Seismic monitors have detected regular, low-level vibrations from areas where underground cities are known to exist. These vibrations follow patterns consistent with human activity rather than natural geological processes. Satellite thermal imaging sometimes shows unexplained heat signatures from locations where no surface activity is visible. And local residents in several provinces report occasional sounds from underground, machinery-like noises that come and go without explanation. Whether these modern uses are connected to the ancient cities or represent entirely new construction, they highlight a fundamental truth about China's relationship with its underground spaces. For over 2,000 years, Chinese civilization has looked downward as well as upward, creating hidden realms that serve purposes ranging from survival to secrecy to strategic advantage. The implications of this underground legacy extend far beyond archaeology or military strategy. These hidden cities represent a completely different approach to civilization itself, one that prioritized concealment over display, depth over height, permanence over visibility. While European castles reached toward the sky as symbols of power, Chinese rulers were simultaneously building their most important strongholds deep beneath the earth, invisible to enemies and invaders. This philosophy of hidden strength permeated every aspect of underground city design. The entrances were masterpieces of camouflage, often disguised as wells, storage cellars, or natural rock formations. Some could only be accessed through existing buildings, with secret passages hidden behind rotating walls or beneath removable floor stones. Others required specific knowledge of hidden mechanisms, stone levers disguised as decorative elements that would open concealed doorways when manipulated in precise sequences. Inside these cities, the layout followed principles that seem almost alien to surface urban planning. Instead of main streets radiating from central squares, the underground cities used a maze-like network of interconnected chambers and corridors. This wasn't accidental chaos, but deliberate defensive design. An invader who somehow discovered an entrance would face a labyrinth where every wrong turn could lead to dead ends, trap chambers, or defensive positions where a few defenders could hold off much larger forces. The psychological impact of these spaces was equally calculated. Chambers were carved with varying ceiling heights, creating spaces that could feel cathedral-like or claustrophobically intimate depending on their intended use. Living quarters were designed with small alcoves and hidden storage spaces that gave residents a sense of personal territory, even in communal settings. Common areas featured acoustic properties that allowed whispered conversations to remain private, while important announcements could be heard throughout entire sections. Water management in these underground cities reveals perhaps the most sophisticated understanding of hydraulic engineering in the ancient world. The builders didn't simply dig wells or collect rainwater. They created complex systems that harvested moisture from the air itself, channeled seasonal flooding into storage reservoirs, and purified groundwater through multi-stage filtration systems using sand, charcoal, and carefully selected stones. In the deeper levels of some cities, archaeologists have discovered chambers specifically designed for water ceremonies and rituals. These spaces feature carved channels that direct water flow in patterns that seem to serve both practical and spiritual purposes. The sound of flowing water was used to mask conversations, create meditative environments, and provide audio cues for navigation in the darkness. The lighting systems developed for these underground cities challenged every assumption about ancient technology. Beyond simple oil lamps and torches, the builders created sophisticated reflection systems using polished bronze mirrors and carefully positioned crystals. Some chambers featured light wells that captured surface sunlight and directed it deep underground through a series of angled mirrors and reflective surfaces. Most ingeniously, they developed bioluminescent lighting systems using specially cultivated fungi and bacteria. Archaeological evidence suggests that certain chambers maintained controlled environments specifically for growing luminescent organisms that could provide steady, low-level lighting without consuming oxygen or producing smoke. These biological light sources could operate continuously for years with minimal maintenance, creating an ethereal blue-green glow that survivors described as both beautiful and otherworldly. The social organization within these underground cities followed unique patterns that adapted traditional Chinese hierarchical structures to the constraints of subterranean life. Leaders weren't distinguished by elevated positions or grand residences, since such displays would waste precious space and resources. Instead, authority was marked by proximity to critical infrastructure, access to information networks, and responsibility for community survival systems. Family units were reorganized into functional groups based on skills and specializations rather than bloodlines alone. Metalworkers, food preparers, teachers, and guards formed professional communities that cut across traditional family boundaries. Children were raised communally, learning skills essential for underground survival while maintaining connections to surface culture through carefully preserved stories, songs, and rituals. The educational systems developed in these cities were remarkable for their focus on memory and oral tradition. Since written materials were precious and vulnerable in the underground environment, knowledge was transmitted through elaborate memory techniques. Students learned to store vast amounts of information using spatial memory methods, associating facts and procedures with specific locations within the underground city itself. These memory palaces weren't just educational tools, but survival mechanisms. In the event that portions of the city were sealed or destroyed, survivors could reconstruct critical knowledge about water sources, food storage, ventilation systems, and escape routes using their mental maps of the underground spaces. The city itself became a library where every chamber, corridor, and carved detail served as a mnemonic device for preserving essential information. Religious and spiritual practices in the underground cities evolved in fascinating ways. Traditional Chinese spiritual beliefs emphasized harmony between heaven and earth, but underground communities developed unique interpretations that found the sacred in darkness and depth. They created meditation chambers with specific acoustic properties that enhance chanting and prayer. They carved altars and shrines that incorporated the natural rock formations, treating the earth itself as a sacred partner in their survival. Some of the deepest chambers appear to have been designed specifically for spiritual practices that required complete isolation from the surface world. These spaces featured complex ventilation systems that could be sealed entirely, creating environments where practitioners could experience absolute silence and darkness for extended periods. Archaeological evidence suggests these chambers were used for initiation rituals, healing ceremonies, and forms of meditation that required complete separation from external stimulation. The trade and economic systems that developed in these underground cities reveal sophisticated adaptations to resource scarcity and isolation. Underground markets operated on principles very different from surface commerce. Value was determined not by rarity or beauty, but by utility and durability in the confined environment. Goods were designed for multiple purposes: compact storage and easy repair using available materials. Craftspeople developed specialized techniques for working in low-light conditions with limited tools and materials. They created textiles from cave-adapted plants, developed metalworking techniques that produced minimal smoke, and perfected food preservation methods that could maintain nutrition and flavor for months or years. These innovations often proved superior to surface techniques and were sometimes adopted by above-ground communities when the cities eventually reconnected with the outside world. The medical knowledge developed in underground cities was particularly advanced, driven by the unique health challenges of subterranean life. Physicians learned to treat conditions caused by limited sunlight, recycled air, and high humidity. They developed herbal remedies using fungi and cave-adapted plants that often proved more effective than traditional surface medicines. Mental health received special attention in these communities, with healers developing techniques specifically for managing the psychological stresses of underground life. They created therapeutic spaces with specific lighting, acoustics, and spatial arrangements designed to combat claustrophobia, depression, and the social tensions that could arise in confined communities. These early forms of environmental psychology were remarkably sophisticated and effective. As we descend deeper into understanding these underground cities, we begin to see them not as simple shelters or storage spaces, but as complete alternative civilizations that operated according to principles fundamentally different from surface societies. They represent humanity's remarkable ability to adapt, innovate, and thrive in environments that would seem impossible to inhabit. But the most profound mystery remains unsolved. Why were so many of these sophisticated, successful underground cities suddenly abandoned? What caused entire populations to leave behind carefully constructed communities and return to the dangerous, exposed surface world? The answers to these questions lie in the deepest chambers, in the most recently discovered cities, and in archaeological evidence that suggests the story of China's underground civilization is far from over. The abandonment of these underground cities remains one of archaeology's most haunting puzzles. Imagine walking through chambers where meals were left half-finished on stone tables, where tools lie scattered as if their owners had simply vanished mid-task. In several sites across Shanxi province, archaeologists have found evidence of sudden evacuations so rapid that valuable items were left behind, including jade ornaments and bronze implements that would have taken months to craft. What could have driven entire communities to abandon spaces they had spent generations perfecting? The answer appears to lie not in a single catastrophic event, but in a combination of factors that made underground life unsustainable despite its sophisticated design. Climate records from ice cores and tree rings suggest that around 200 CE, China experienced a period of dramatic environmental change. temperatures dropped significantly, and rainfall patterns shifted in ways that would have affected the delicate water management systems these cities relied upon. Underground rivers that had flowed for centuries began to dry up or change course. Ventilation systems that depended on specific temperature differentials between surface and underground air began to fail as weather patterns shifted. But climate change alone doesn't explain the evidence of hasty departure. In the underground city discovered near Luoyang, archaeologists found something far more disturbing. Sealed chambers containing the remains of what appears to be an entire community, not victims of violence or disease, but people who had barricaded themselves into the deepest levels of the city and never emerged. The positioning of these remains suggests they were hiding from something, sealing themselves deeper and deeper into the earth until they reached chambers from which there was no escape. Carbon dating places their deaths during the period of the Three Kingdoms, when warlords fought brutal campaigns across northern China. But historical records from that period make no mention of battles in the areas where these underground cities existed. This has led some archaeologists to propose a chilling theory. Perhaps these cities weren't abandoned by choice. Perhaps something happened that made the surface world so dangerous that entire populations chose death in their underground sanctuaries rather than risking exposure above ground. The question is, what could have been so terrifying that people who had survived generations in underground cities would choose to seal themselves into tomb-like chambers rather than face it? Recent discoveries have provided some disturbing clues. In 2019, construction work near the ancient city of Kaifeng broke through into a previously unknown underground complex. What workers found defied easy explanation. The chambers showed signs of having been sealed from the inside, but not gradually or carefully. Stone blocks had been hastily piled against entrances, creating barriers that would have been impossible to move from either side once in place. More puzzling still were the carvings found on the walls of these sealed chambers. Unlike the careful, purposeful artwork found in other underground cities, these appeared to have been scratched frantically into the stone, showing scenes of surface destruction so complete that nothing recognizable remained above ground. The style was crude, desperate, as if carved by people who had little time and less hope. Chemical analysis of the air trapped within these sealed chambers revealed something that has never been satisfactorily explained. Elevated levels of compounds that shouldn't exist in underground environments, substances that suggest the presence of materials or processes unknown to ancient Chinese technology. Some archaeologists have theorized that these compounds might be the result of natural disasters, perhaps volcanic activity, that released toxic gases across large areas of northern China. But volcanic activity would have left geological evidence, and no such evidence has been found. The mystery deepens when similar chemical signatures have been detected in sealed chambers across multiple provinces, sometimes hundreds of miles apart. Whatever created these compounds affected a vast area of ancient China, yet left no trace in the historical record and no evidence on the surface. The pattern of abandonment reveals another troubling aspect. The underground cities weren't evacuated all at once, but in waves over a period of several decades. Archaeological evidence suggests that some communities tried repeatedly to return to the surface, only to retreat back underground after brief periods. Each return lasted shorter than the last, until finally the cities were sealed permanently. This pattern suggests that whatever danger existed on the surface wasn't a single catastrophic event, but an ongoing threat that persisted for generations. Something that made the surface world uninhabitable, despite the sophisticated survival systems the underground cities had developed. Something that got worse over time rather than better. Modern technology has begun to reveal just how extensive the network of abandoned underground cities truly was. Satellite imaging using advanced ground-penetrating radar has identified underground anomalies across 17 Chinese provinces. Many of these sites show the characteristic signatures of artificial construction, chambers and corridors carved from solid rock in patterns too regular to be natural formations. Most remarkably, these sites appear to be connected by tunnel networks that span incredible distances. Computer modeling based on seismic data suggests that some tunnels run for over 200 miles underground, connecting cities that are now separated by mountain ranges and major rivers. If accurate, this would mean that ancient China possessed an underground transportation network, more extensive than many modern highway systems. The engineering required for such tunnels challenges everything we thought we knew about ancient Chinese capabilities. These weren't simple mine shafts or storage tunnels, but carefully graded passages designed for regular travel. They show evidence of sophisticated drainage systems, ventilation networks, and even rest stations positioned at regular intervals along their length. But here's what makes these discoveries truly extraordinary. Some of these tunnels appear to still be intact and navigable. In 2020, a team of speleologists exploring natural caves in Hubei province discovered what appeared to be an artificial tunnel system, connecting their cave to others over 30 miles away. When they followed the tunnels, they found chambers that showed signs of recent use, including modern debris and evidence of electrical installations. This discovery has been classified by Chinese authorities, but leaked reports suggest that the tunnel system connects to underground facilities that are still operational today. Whether these represent continuous use since ancient times or modern reactivation of ancient infrastructure remains unclear. What is clear is that China's underground cities weren't simply historical curiosities, but part of a living tradition of subterranean development that continues to this day. The strategic implications of such a network would be enormous. Underground transportation routes immune to satellite surveillance, hidden facilities that could serve as command centers or manufacturing sites, storage areas that couldn't be detected or targeted by conventional military means. For a nation facing potential conflicts with technologically advanced adversaries, such underground infrastructure would provide significant advantages. But the modern use of these ancient systems raises profound questions about continuity and purpose. If some underground cities have been continuously occupied or regularly maintained for over 2,000 years, what does that say about their original purpose? Were they really just emergency shelters? Or were they designed from the beginning as permanent alternative infrastructure for Chinese civilization? Evidence for continuous occupation comes from multiple sources. Local residents in several provinces report regular, unexplained truck traffic to remote locations where no surface facilities exist. Geological surveys have detected patterns of ground subsidence consistent with ongoing excavation or maintenance work in areas where ancient underground cities are known to exist. Most tellingly, electrical consumption data from rural areas sometimes shows usage patterns that can't be explained by surface facilities alone. The secrecy surrounding these sites makes definitive answers impossible, but the circumstantial evidence suggests that China's underground cities never truly ended. Instead, they evolved, adapting ancient survival technologies to modern strategic needs. The same principles that allowed ancient Chinese communities to disappear beneath the earth during times of crisis may now serve contemporary purposes that require similar invisibility. This continuity helps explain one of the most puzzling aspects of the historical record. Why did Chinese emperors and governments consistently downplay or omit references to underground cities that were clearly massive engineering projects requiring enormous resources and labor? The answer may be that these cities were never intended to be temporary measures or historical curiosities. They were strategic infrastructure, designed to remain hidden and operational across multiple dynasties and political systems. From this perspective, the apparent abandonment of ancient underground cities takes on a different meaning. Perhaps they weren't abandoned at all, but simply transitioned to different uses as surface conditions changed. Communities that had lived entirely underground during times of crisis might have moved to surface settlements while maintaining their underground infrastructure for storage, manufacturing, or emergency use. This would explain the archaeological evidence of gradual, rather than sudden abandonment. Instead of entire populations fleeing their underground homes, smaller groups, might have rotated between surface and underground facilities based on seasonal needs, political conditions, or economic opportunities. The underground cities would have remained functional even as their primary residential use declined. Archaeological evidence supports this theory of transitional use. Many underground cities show signs of modification and expansion that occurred centuries after their initial construction. New chambers were carved, ventilation systems were upgraded, and storage areas were reconfigured in ways that suggest ongoing maintenance and development rather than gradual abandonment. The sophistication of these later modifications is particularly intriguing. Chambers added during the Tang and Song dynasties show engineering techniques that were arguably superior to the original construction. Water management systems were refined, lighting systems were improved, and defensive features were enhanced based on centuries of practical experience. This suggests that knowledge of underground city construction wasn't lost when the original communities moved to the surface. Instead, it was preserved and developed by specialized groups who maintained these facilities across multiple generations. These maintenance communities would have developed their own unique culture, combining ancient survival techniques with innovations driven by changing needs and improving technology. The existence of such maintenance communities would explain many of the mysteries surrounding China's underground cities. Why certain sites show evidence of recent activity despite being officially abandoned for centuries. Why local populations in some areas possess detailed knowledge of underground features that aren't supposed to exist. Why government authorities are often reluctant to discuss or investigate underground anomalies in certain regions. It would also explain the recurring theme in Chinese folklore of underground kingdoms populated by mysterious guardians who emerge only during times of great crisis. These stories, found across multiple provinces and ethnic groups, consistently describe underground dwellers who possess advanced knowledge and hidden technologies. Rather than pure mythology, these tales might represent cultural memories of real communities that maintained underground infrastructure across centuries of political change. The implications extend far beyond archaeology or military strategy. If China has maintained underground cities continuously for over 2,000 years, it represents one of the longest-running civilizational projects in human history. It suggests a level of institutional continuity and strategic thinking that spans far longer periods than most nations or empires have even existed. Modern China's rapid development of underground infrastructure for metros, shopping complexes, and industrial facilities might not be simply copying Western urban planning concepts. Instead, it could represent the latest phase of an underground development tradition that predates most surface cities. Chinese engineers working on modern underground projects might be drawing on institutional knowledge and practical experience accumulated over millennia of subterranean construction. This perspective transforms our understanding of Chinese civilization itself. Rather than a purely surface-based culture that occasionally built underground shelters during emergencies, China might be better understood as a dual-level civilization that has always maintained both surface and underground components. The underground cities weren't exceptions to normal Chinese urban development, but integral parts of a comprehensive approach to settlement and survival that recognize the strategic value of hidden infrastructure. As modern technology continues to reveal the true extent of China's underground cities, we're forced to reconsider fundamental assumptions about ancient capabilities, strategic planning, and civilizational continuity. These aren't just archaeological sites or historical curiosities. They're evidence of the approach to human settlement that prioritized long-term survival over short-term visibility, strategic depth over immediate convenience, and institutional continuity over individual recognition. The story of China's underground cities is still being written. Each new discovery reveals additional layers of complexity, additional evidence of sophisticated planning and execution that challenges our understanding of what ancient civilizations could achieve. And somewhere beneath the modern cities and industrial developments of contemporary China, in chambers carved from stone 2,000 years ago. That story continues in darkness and silence, waiting for the next chapter to unfold. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of these underground cities isn't their engineering sophistication or strategic importance. It's what they reveal about human adaptability and determination. When faced with seemingly impossible circumstances, entire communities chose to literally move heaven and earth, carving new worlds beneath the surface where life could continue, despite any threat above ground. In these hidden depths, time moved differently than it did on the surface. While dynasties rose and fell above ground, the underground cities maintained their own rhythms, their own seasons marked not by sunlight and weather, but by the subtle changes in air pressure, water flow, and the distant vibrations that filtered down through layers of stone and soil. The children born in these subterranean realms knew a world that surface dwellers could barely imagine. They learned to navigate by touch in complete darkness, their fingers reading the carved symbols and directional markers etched into stone walls like a language of survival. They understood acoustics in ways that would astonish modern sound engineers, able to identify the location and distance of approaching footsteps based on how voices echoed through different chambers. These underground children developed senses that seemed almost supernatural to surface visitors. They could detect changes in air quality that warned of blocked ventilation shafts hours before adults noticed any discomfort. They could hear the subtle sounds that indicated structural problems in tunnel walls or shifts in underground water sources. Most remarkably, they seemed to possess an internal compass that allowed them to maintain perfect orientation even in the maze-like networks of interconnected passages. But childhood in the underground cities wasn't simply about survival skills. The communities that thrived in these hidden spaces created rich cultural traditions that were uniquely adapted to their environment. They developed forms of music that used the natural resonance of stone chambers, creating harmonies that could never be replicated on the surface. They invented games that taught essential navigation and problem-solving skills, while providing entertainment during long winter months when even brief surface expeditions were impossible. The artistic traditions that emerged from these underground communities were unlike anything found in surface Chinese culture. Working with limited light and materials, artisans developed techniques for creating beauty from shadows and textures, rather than bright colors and elaborate decorations. They carved relief sculptures that told stories through touch as much as sight, creating narratives that could be experienced even in complete darkness. These tactile art forms served multiple purposes beyond aesthetic expression. They functioned as information storage systems, recording important historical events, technical procedures, and cultural knowledge in ways that could survive even if written records were lost or destroyed. A single carved wall might contain detailed instructions for water purification, food preservation, tunnel maintenance, and emergency procedures, all encoded in artistic motifs that appeared decorative to casual observers, but carried vital information for those trained to read them. The marriage and family customs that developed in underground cities reflected the unique challenges and opportunities of subterranean life. Traditional Chinese emphasis on extended family networks became even more important when survival depended on cooperation and mutual support. But the confined spaces also required new approaches to privacy, personal relationships, and conflict resolution. Underground communities developed elaborate social protocols for managing interpersonal tensions in spaces where physical separation was limited. They created mediation systems that could resolve disputes quickly and effectively before they escalated into conflicts that could threaten community survival. They established rotating privacy systems that allowed couples and families to have personal time and space despite the communal nature of underground living. Most fascinating were the courtship and marriage rituals that evolved in these hidden societies. Without access to traditional gifts like silk, jewelry, or exotic goods from distant provinces, young people developed new ways of expressing affection and commitment. They created intricate stone carvings as tokens of love, composed songs that showcased their understanding of underground acoustics, and demonstrated their worthiness as partners through displays of practical skills essential for subterranean survival. The educational systems in these underground cities produced individuals with knowledge and capabilities that often surpass their surface counterparts. Students learned not just traditional Chinese classics and cultural traditions, but also advanced engineering, medicine, and survival techniques that were rarely taught above ground. They studied geology and hydrology with practical intensity, since understanding rock formations and water behavior could mean the difference between life and death for their communities. Mathematics in underground cities took on practical applications that drove innovation beyond theoretical knowledge. Students learned to calculate precise angles for ventilation shafts that would maximize airflow, to determine load-bearing capacities for carved chambers, and to design water distribution systems that could serve large populations with minimal waste. These mathematical skills often exceeded what was taught in imperial academies, driven by the immediate practical needs of underground survival. Language and communication evolved in remarkable ways within these hidden communities. Beyond standard Chinese dialects, underground cities developed their own specialized vocabularies for describing subterranean phenomena that had no surface equivalents. They created efficient systems of non-verbal communication for situations where silence was essential, using hand signals, touch codes, and even scent markers to convey complex information without making sound. The medical knowledge developed in these underground communities was particularly advanced, driven by the unique health challenges of subterranean living. Physicians learned to treat conditions caused by limited sunlight exposure, managing vitamin deficiencies and bone problems that were rare on the surface. They developed expertise in treating injuries caused by cave-ins, tunnel collapses, and the specific types of accidents that occurred in underground environments. Mental health received special attention in these communities, with healers developing sophisticated understanding of the psychological challenges of confined living. They recognized that different individuals responded differently to underground life, and they developed screening methods to identify people who were psychologically suited for long-term subterranean residence. They created therapeutic techniques specifically designed to help people maintain emotional stability during extended periods without natural light or open spaces. The pharmaceutical knowledge that emerged from underground cities was remarkable for its focus on locally available materials. Since surface herbs and medicines were often unavailable, underground physicians became experts in the medicinal properties of fungi, cave minerals, and the specialized plants that could grow in low-light conditions. They developed preparation techniques that concentrated the active compounds in these materials, creating medicines that were often more potent than their surface equivalents. Food production in underground cities required innovations that challenged every assumption about agriculture and nutrition. While some communities relied primarily on stored surface crops, others developed sophisticated systems for growing food in underground environments. They cultivated mushrooms and fungi not just as food sources, but as components of complex ecosystems that helped maintain air quality and waste processing. The most advanced underground cities developed hydroponic systems centuries before such techniques were known in Western agriculture. Using carefully managed water circulation and mineral supplementation, they could grow vegetables and grains in chambers that received no natural sunlight. They learned to create artificial growing conditions using reflected light, controlled temperatures, and precisely balanced nutrient solutions. Protein sources in underground cities came from carefully managed populations of small animals that could thrive in subterranean conditions. They raised rabbits, chickens, and even fish in specially designed chambers that maintained optimal conditions for breeding and growth. These animal husbandry systems were marvels of efficiency, producing maximum nutrition while minimizing waste and resource consumption. Food preservation techniques developed in underground cities were far advanced beyond surface methods. Without access to natural refrigeration or traditional preservation materials, underground communities invented methods that could keep food fresh and nutritious for months or even years. They developed fermentation processes, smoking techniques using special underground fuels, and dehydration methods that preserved not just calories, but essential nutrients. The cooking systems used in underground cities were masterpieces of engineering that solved multiple challenges simultaneously. They had to provide adequate heat for food preparation while minimizing smoke production that could contaminate limited air supplies. They needed to be fuel efficient, since combustible materials were precious resources, and they had to be designed to prevent carbon monoxide poisoning in enclosed spaces. Underground chefs developed cooking techniques that maximized flavor and nutrition while meeting these constraints. They learned to use heated stones for cooking methods that required no ongoing fuel consumption. They developed smoking and steaming techniques that used minimal fire while imparting complex flavors to preserved foods. They created fermented seasonings and flavor enhancers that could transform simple ingredients into satisfying meals. The textile production that emerged in underground cities reflected both practical needs and creative innovation. Without access to silk production or cotton cultivation, underground communities learned to create fabrics from alternative materials. They developed techniques for processing plant fibers that could grow in low-light conditions, creating surprisingly durable and comfortable clothing materials. Most remarkably, they learned to work with animal fibers in ways that produced textiles superior to many surface fabrics. Using wool from underground raised animals and fur from carefully managed populations of small mammals, they created warm, durable clothing perfectly suited to the cool, humid conditions of subterranean life. The dyeing and decoration techniques used in underground textile production were adapted to available materials and lighting conditions. Since bright colors were difficult to achieve and appreciate in low-light environments, underground textile workers focused on creating fabrics with interesting textures, patterns that could be appreciated by touch, and subtle color variations that were visible even in dim lighting. Tool making in underground cities pushed metallurgy and craftsmanship to new levels of sophistication. Working with limited fuel for forges and restricted access to raw materials, underground smiths learned to create tools that were more durable and efficient than their surface counterparts. They developed techniques for recycling and reforging metal that extracted maximum utility from every piece of iron, bronze, or precious metal. The tools created in underground workshops were marvels of specialized design. Each implement was crafted for multiple purposes, reducing the total number of tools needed while maximizing functionality. They created digging implements that also served as weapons, cooking utensils that doubled as measuring devices, and construction tools that could be rapidly converted for emergency repairs or defense. Stoneworking techniques in underground cities reached levels of precision that modern craftsmen struggle to replicate. Working entirely by touch and limited light, underground stone carvers learned to create perfectly fitted joints, smooth surfaces, and intricate decorative elements using hand tools and techniques passed down through generations of subterranean artisans. The quality of stonework found in the deepest levels of some underground cities suggests that these communities maintained specialized guilds of master craftsmen whose skills were devoted entirely to underground construction and decoration. These artisans developed techniques for working with different types of stone, understanding how various minerals and rock formations responded to carving, polishing, and structural modification. But perhaps the most impressive aspect of underground city technology was the integration of all these specialized skills into comprehensive urban systems. The underground cities weren't collections of separate technologies, but carefully orchestrated environments where ventilation, water management, food production, waste disposal, lighting, heating, and defense all worked together as unified systems. The level of planning required to create such integrated environments suggests that underground city designers possessed sophisticated understanding of systems engineering principles that wouldn't be formally recognized in Western science for many centuries. They understood feedback loops, redundancy planning, and failure mode analysis in ways that allowed them to create robust systems that could continue functioning even when individual components failed. Modern engineers studying these ancient underground cities often express amazement at the sophistication of the design principles involved. Computer modeling of ventilation systems reveals optimization techniques that match or exceed modern HVAC design standards. Analysis of water distribution networks shows hydraulic engineering that rivals contemporary municipal water systems. Structural analysis of load-bearing elements demonstrates understanding of engineering principles that weren't formally documented until the industrial age. Yet all of this sophisticated engineering was accomplished using hand tools, human labor, and materials available to ancient Chinese communities. There's no evidence of advanced machinery, unknown technologies, or external assistance. The underground cities were built using human intelligence, careful planning, and generations of accumulated knowledge about how to create livable spaces beneath the earth. This raises profound questions about the true capabilities of ancient civilizations and the assumptions we make about technological progress. If Chinese communities 2,000 years ago could create underground cities that rivaled modern engineering achievements, what other capabilities might have existed in the ancient world that we've forgotten or never recognized? The discovery and study of China's underground cities forces us to reconsider the relationship between technological sophistication and historical visibility. The most impressive achievements of these ancient communities were deliberately hidden, designed to remain invisible and unknown. Their greatest successes were measured not by monuments that proclaimed their glory, but by the simple fact that they survived generation after generation, in spaces that the outside world never knew existed. As we continue to explore these hidden realms, each discovery reveals new layers of complexity and sophistication that challenge our understanding of what ancient people could accomplish when driven by necessity and guided by accumulated wisdom. The underground cities of China weren't just shelters or storage spaces, but complete alternative civilizations that solved fundamental problems of human survival in ways that modern society is only beginning to appreciate and understand. In the deepest chambers of these ancient cities, where stone corridors stretch beyond the reach of any light, the echoes of 2,000 years of human ingenuity still resonate through the darkness. And in that darkness, the story of humanity's most hidden achievement continues to unfold, one carefully carved stone at a time. The preservation systems developed in these underground cities extended far beyond simple storage. The deepest chambers functioned as vast libraries where knowledge itself was protected from the ravages of time and surface destruction. But these weren't libraries as we understand them today, filled with scrolls and bound volumes. These were living repositories where information was embedded into the very architecture of the spaces themselves. Stone walls became pages of instruction manuals, their carved surfaces encoding everything from astronomical calculations to medicinal formulas. The positioning of chambers, the angles of corridors, even the placement of drainage channels carried mathematical and engineering knowledge that could be read by those trained in the symbolic language of underground construction. A single room might contain decades of accumulated wisdom about metallurgy, agriculture, or military tactics, all hidden in plain sight within decorative patterns that appeared purely ornamental to uninitiated visitors. The most sophisticated of these knowledge preservation systems used what archaeologists now call architectural mnemonics. Complex information was encoded into the physical layout of entire city sections, creating memory palaces where trained individuals could mentally navigate through vast databases of technical and cultural knowledge. A master craftsman could walk through specific sequences of chambers and corridors, using the physical journey to trigger recall of detailed procedures for everything from sword making to silk production. These systems proved remarkably durable. Even when communities were forced to abandon their underground cities temporarily, knowledge preservation systems allowed them to rapidly reconstruct essential technologies and procedures when they returned. The cities themselves became external memory devices that could store information across generations without requiring continuous human maintenance or interpretation. But the most intriguing aspect of these preservation systems was their apparent coordination across vast distances. Similar encoding methods have been found in underground cities separated by hundreds of miles, suggesting that knowledge preservation wasn't just a local innovation, but part of a standardized system that operated across multiple provinces and dynasties. This implies a level of coordination and communication between underground communities that historians are only beginning to understand. Recent archaeological work has revealed evidence of what appears to be a formal curriculum for training knowledge keepers, individuals whose sole responsibility was maintaining and interpreting these architectural information systems. These specialists underwent decades of training, learning not just how to read the encoded information, but how to add new knowledge to existing systems without disrupting previously stored data. The training centers for these knowledge keepers were marvels of specialized design. They featured practice chambers, where students could learn to carve information into stone with the precision required for long-term preservation. They included testing rooms where accuracy of recall could be verified, and ceremonial spaces where successful candidates were inducted into the secretive brotherhood of underground librarians. These knowledge keepers developed their own specialized tools and techniques for working with stone information systems. They created portable measuring devices that ensured consistent scaling and proportions across different installation sites. They developed carving techniques that could embed multiple layers of information in single surfaces, allowing the same stone wall to serve different purposes depending on the level of training of the person reading it. Most remarkably, they created updating systems that allowed new information to be added to existing installations without corrupting previously stored data. Using carefully planned expansion areas and standardized connection protocols, knowledge keepers could modify ancient information systems to include new discoveries, technological improvements, or changing circumstances while preserving the integrity of historical knowledge. The psychological training required for knowledge keepers was as intensive as their technical education. They learned meditation and memory techniques that allowed them to maintain perfect recall of vast amounts of information while working in the challenging conditions of underground environments. They developed mental discipline that enabled them to work for hours in complete darkness, relying entirely on touch and spatial memory to navigate complex carving and maintenance tasks. The selection process for knowledge keeper candidates was rigorous and began in early childhood. Children who showed exceptional spatial memory, tactile sensitivity, and psychological stability were identified and began preliminary training around age 7. Only a small percentage of candidates successfully completed the full training program, which typically took 15 to 20 years and required demonstrated mastery of dozens of specialized skills. The social status of knowledge keepers within underground communities was unique. They held positions of enormous respect and authority, but their roles required them to remain largely invisible and anonymous. Their greatest successes were measured by the seamless operation of information systems that most community members never consciously noticed or understood. They were simultaneously the most essential and most hidden members of their societies. The tools and materials used by knowledge keepers reveal sophisticated understanding of stone properties, tool metallurgy, and precision measurement that rivals modern technical standards. They developed specialized chisels that could create consistent line weights and depths across different types of stone. They created measuring systems that maintained accuracy across temperature variations and humidity changes common in underground environments. The pigments and marking materials used in underground information systems were carefully selected for longevity and visibility in low-light conditions. Knowledge keepers developed formulations using locally available minerals and organic compounds that could remain clearly readable for centuries while resisting the dampness and chemical changes that occurred in underground environments. The maintenance schedules followed by knowledge keepers reveal systematic approaches to information preservation that ensured continuity across multiple generations. They conducted regular inspections of all carved surfaces, identifying and correcting deterioration before it could compromise stored information. They maintained detailed records of modifications and additions, creating change logs that allowed future keepers to understand the evolution of information systems over time. The coordination between knowledge keepers across different underground cities was maintained through a sophisticated communication network that operated independently of normal political and military channels. Knowledge keepers had their own messenger systems, coded languages, and verification protocols that allowed them to share technical innovations and coordinate preservation standards across vast distances without alerting surface authorities to their activities. This communication network proved remarkably resilient during periods of political upheaval and surface warfare. While armies fought above ground and dynasties rose and fell, the Knowledge Keeper network continued operating, preserving and sharing information that transcended the temporary concerns of political power. They maintained technical and cultural knowledge that would have been lost forever if it had depended on surface institutions for preservation. The ceremonial aspects of Knowledge Keeper training and advancement reveal spiritual dimensions to their work that went far beyond technical skill. They developed rituals and traditions that treated information preservation as a sacred duty, connecting their work to larger cosmic principles about the continuity of human knowledge and the responsibility of each generation to preserve wisdom for future communities. These spiritual frameworks helped knowledge keepers maintain motivation and discipline during the long years of training and the often isolated conditions of their work. They created meaning systems that elevated technical preservation work to the level of spiritual practice, treating each carved symbol and maintained information system as an offering to future generations and a contribution to the eternal accumulation of human wisdom. The decline of the Knowledge Keeper system appears to have been gradual rather than sudden, occurring over several centuries as underground communities shifted their primary residence to surface locations. As the immediate survival needs that had driven underground city development became less pressing, the resources devoted to maintaining sophisticated information preservation systems were gradually redirected to other priorities. But the Knowledge Keeper tradition didn't disappear entirely. Evidence suggests that simplified versions of their techniques were absorbed into other Chinese cultural institutions, influencing everything from temple architecture to garden design to the layout of imperial palaces. The principles of architectural information encoding can be traced through Chinese cultural development, appearing in contexts where their underground origins were forgotten, but their practical effectiveness was preserved. Modern archaeological investigation of underground information systems requires interdisciplinary teams that combine traditional archaeological methods with expertise in ancient Chinese languages, symbolic systems, mathematical analysis, and computer modeling. Researchers must learn to think like ancient knowledge keepers, developing intuitive understanding of how information was conceptualized and organized by people whose worldview was fundamentally different from contemporary approaches. The decoding process is painstakingly slow, often requiring months or years to fully understand the information contained in a single chamber. Each carved surface must be documented with photographic precision, analyzed for symbolic content, and cross-referenced with similar carvings from other sites. Computer analysis helps identify patterns and relationships that might not be apparent to human observers. But the final interpretation still requires deep understanding of ancient Chinese culture and technology. Recent breakthroughs in decoding have revealed information systems of staggering complexity and sophistication. Single rooms have been found to contain complete technical manuals for advanced metallurgy, detailed astronomical observations spanning centuries, and medical knowledge that includes surgical procedures and pharmaceutical formulations that weren't documented in surface medical texts until much later periods. The implications of these discoveries extend far beyond archaeology or history. They suggest that ancient Chinese civilization had access to technical knowledge and preservation systems that were far more advanced than previously understood. The underground cities weren't just sophisticated engineering projects, but repositories of human knowledge that preserved information across centuries of political upheaval and cultural change. The knowledge preserved in these underground systems fills significant gaps in our understanding of ancient Chinese capabilities. Technologies and techniques that historians thought were lost or never developed have been found encoded in stone chambers, waiting for modern researchers to rediscover methods that were once common knowledge among underground communities. Perhaps most significantly, the discovery of these information preservation systems changes our understanding of how knowledge was transmitted and maintained in ancient civilizations. Rather than relying solely on written documents or oral traditions, Chinese communities developed physical information storage systems that were more durable than paper or parchment and more reliable than human memory. The study of underground information systems has practical applications for modern information preservation challenges. The techniques developed by ancient knowledge keepers for encoding complex information in durable physical formats offer insights that could be valuable for long-term data storage in contemporary digital systems. Their approaches to redundancy, error correction, and system maintenance provide models that remain relevant for current information management challenges. As research continues, each newly decoded chamber reveals additional layers of ancient knowledge and innovation. The underground cities of China are proving to be not just remarkable examples of ancient engineering, but vast libraries of human knowledge that were deliberately hidden to ensure their survival across centuries of surface turmoil and change. The work of understanding these hidden repositories of knowledge continues in laboratories and research centers around the world, where archaeologists, linguists, and computer scientists collaborate to unlock secrets that have waited patiently in darkness for over 2,000 years. Each decoded symbol brings us closer to understanding the true scope of ancient Chinese achievement and the remarkable foresight of people who built not just cities, but entire civilizations designed to preserve human knowledge for future generations who might desperately need the wisdom of the past. In the deepest chambers of these underground cities, where the most sensitive and valuable information was preserved, modern researchers continue to make discoveries that challenge everything we thought we knew about ancient capabilities. And in those discoveries, we find not just technical knowledge, but profound insights into human ingenuity, determination, and the timeless drive to preserve wisdom for future generations, no matter what challenges they might face in the world above. The economic systems that sustain these underground cities reveal sophisticated understanding of resource management and trade that operated entirely outside normal surface commerce. These hidden economies developed their own currencies, trade networks, and production systems that allowed underground communities to maintain high standards of living while remaining completely invisible to surface authorities. Underground currencies weren't based on precious metals or traditional Chinese monetary systems, but on practical items that had genuine utility in subterranean environments. Standardized tool components, measured quantities of preserved foods, and certified materials for construction and repair functioned as media of exchange that maintained value regardless of surface economic conditions. The production systems developed in underground cities were marvels of efficiency and specialization that often exceeded the capabilities of surface workshops. Working with limited space and resources, underground craftsmen developed techniques that maximized output while minimizing waste. They created modular production systems where multiple products could be manufactured using the same tools and workspace, allowing rapid shifts in production priorities based on changing community needs. Quality control in underground production systems was rigorous, driven by the reality that defective tools or materials could threaten community survival. Every manufactured item underwent multiple inspections, and craftsmen developed reputations for reliability that determined their social status and economic opportunities within underground communities. The trade networks that connected different underground cities operated through carefully maintained tunnel systems and communication networks that bypassed surface transportation entirely. Specialized traders who knew the underground routes could transport goods across vast distances without ever appearing above ground. creating commerce flows that were invisible to surface authorities and taxation systems. These underground trade networks developed their own protocols for managing long-distance commerce in challenging conditions. They created standardized packaging systems that protected goods during tunnel transport, developed credit and payment systems that allowed transactions across great distances, and established quality standards that ensured consistent value across different production centers. The specialization that emerged within underground trade networks was remarkable for its sophistication and efficiency. Different underground cities developed expertise in specific products or services, creating an underground economy where communities could focus on their comparative advantages while accessing essential goods and services through trade with other hidden settlements. The logistics of underground commerce required innovations in transportation and storage that solved problems unknown to surface traders. Underground merchants developed wheeled vehicles specifically designed for tunnel transport, created preservation techniques that maintained product quality during long underground journeys, and established way stations and storage depots at strategic points along major underground routes. The security systems that protected underground trade were necessarily different from surface methods. Instead of armed guards or fortified warehouses, underground commerce relied on secrecy, redundancy, and community cooperation. Valuable goods were dispersed across multiple hidden locations, trade routes were known only to trusted specialists, and community members shared responsibility for protecting commercial activities that benefited everyone. The record-keeping systems used in underground commerce were marvels of compact efficiency that stored complex commercial information in minimal space using durable materials. Trade records were carved into stone tablets using standardized symbolic systems that could record transaction details, quality specifications, and delivery schedules in formats that remained readable for decades or centuries. The dispute resolution systems that governed underground commerce had to operate without access to surface legal institutions or enforcement mechanisms. Underground communities developed mediation and arbitration systems that could resolve commercial disputes quickly and fairly while maintaining the secrecy essential for community survival. The credit and banking systems that emerged in underground cities were surprisingly sophisticated, allowing communities to manage complex financial relationships across time and distance. Underground banks developed techniques for assessing creditworthiness, managing risk, and facilitating payments that operated entirely outside surface financial systems. The insurance and risk management systems used in underground commerce addressed hazards that were unknown in surface trade. Underground merchants developed methods for sharing risks associated with tunnel transport, storage in underground facilities, and the unique challenges of maintaining commercial relationships in hidden communities. The seasonal patterns that governed underground commerce were different from surface trade cycles, driven by factors like tunnel accessibility, underground water levels, and the timing of necessary surface interactions. Underground merchants learned to anticipate and plan for these cycles, developing inventory management and production scheduling systems that maximized efficiency within these constraints. The innovation systems that drove continuous improvement in underground commerce were remarkable for their emphasis on practical problem-solving and incremental advancement. Underground communities rewarded innovations that improved efficiency, reduced risk, or enhanced security, creating incentive systems that encouraged continuous technological and procedural development. The training and apprenticeship systems that prepared individuals for roles in underground commerce were comprehensive programs that combined technical skills with cultural knowledge and ethical training. Underground merchants needed to understand not just the mechanics of trade, but the social systems and survival requirements that made underground communities possible. The retirement and succession systems that managed transitions in underground commerce ensured continuity of essential commercial relationships across generations. Underground communities developed methods for transferring commercial knowledge, relationships, and responsibilities that maintained trade network stability even as individual participants aged or died. The expansion systems that allowed underground commerce to grow and adapt were carefully planned processes that balanced opportunity with security. New trade routes, production facilities, or commercial relationships were evaluated not just for economic potential, but for their impact on community safety and secrecy. The integration of underground commerce with surface economies when necessary was managed through carefully controlled interfaces that allowed essential exchanges while maintaining security. Underground communities developed methods for acquiring surface goods and disposing of surplus production without revealing their existence or locations. The legacy systems that preserved commercial knowledge and relationships across political changes and surface upheavals were essential for long-term community survival. Underground commerce developed institutional memory systems that could maintain critical commercial relationships even during extended periods when direct contact was impossible. As modern researchers study the evidence of these sophisticated underground economies, they're discovering commercial and financial innovations that preceded similar surface developments by centuries. The underground cities of China weren't just engineering marvels, but economic laboratories where communities developed solutions to commercial challenges that remain relevant for contemporary business and trade. The study of underground commerce provides insights into alternative economic models that operated successfully outside conventional political and monetary systems. These hidden economies demonstrated that sophisticated commercial relationships could develop and thrive based on practical value, community cooperation, and shared survival needs, rather than external authority or abstract financial instruments. In the silent chambers where underground merchants once conducted their careful negotiations and recorded their precise transactions, modern economists find evidence of human ingenuity and adaptability that challenges conventional assumptions about commerce, value, and economic organization. The underground cities preserved not just technical knowledge, but entire alternative approaches to economic life that offer valuable perspectives for understanding the full range of human commercial capability. The defensive systems developed within these underground cities reveal military innovations that were centuries ahead of their time. But these weren't conventional fortifications designed for open warfare. They were psychological mazes, engineered to turn the very architecture against invaders who somehow discovered the hidden entrances. The first line of defense was invisibility itself. Entrances were masterpieces of camouflage, designed to appear as natural rock formations, abandoned wells, or collapsed structures. Some required specific knowledge of hidden mechanisms, stone panels that would rotate only when pressed in precise sequences, known only to community members. Others were accessible only during certain times of day when shadows fell at particular angles, revealing openings that remained invisible under different lighting conditions. But for those who somehow penetrated these outer defenses, the real challenges began. The tunnel systems leading into underground cities were designed as elaborate psychological warfare devices. Passages would branch in multiple directions, with most routes leading to dead ends, false chambers, or carefully constructed loops that would return intruders to their starting point without their realizing it. The ceiling heights in these defensive tunnels varied dramatically and deliberately. Sections would suddenly drop to force invaders to crawl, making them vulnerable and disoriented, then open into chambers so vast that voices would echo strangely, creating auditory confusion that made it impossible to determine direction or distance. These acoustic properties weren't accidental, but carefully calculated to maximize psychological stress on unfamiliar visitors. Water played a crucial role in underground defense systems. Passages could be rapidly flooded using controlled diversions of underground streams, trapping invaders in rising water while providing escape routes for defenders who knew the locations of hidden air pockets and emergency exits. Some tunnels featured false floors that would give way under the weight of armed men, dropping them into water-filled chambers from which escape was nearly impossible. The lighting systems in defensive areas were designed to advantage defenders while disadvantaging intruders. Chambers featured concealed alcoves where defenders could remain hidden while observing approaching enemies, silhouetted against carefully positioned light sources. Mirror systems could redirect light to create blinding reflections or false shadows that disguised the true positions of defensive positions. The most sophisticated defensive innovation was the use of controlled airflow to create psychological pressure on invaders. Ventilation systems could be adjusted to create unnatural air currents, strange sounds, and even controlled release of smoke or other substances that would disorient attackers while leaving defenders, who understood the systems, unaffected. Some defensive chambers featured mechanical systems that could be activated to change the physical layout of spaces. Stone panels could be moved to block passages, create new routes, or isolate sections of the tunnel system. These mechanisms required no external power source, but used counterweight systems and human-powered mechanisms that could be operated quickly by small numbers of defenders. The communication systems used in underground defense were remarkably sophisticated. Acoustic channels carried whispered messages across great distances, allowing defenders to coordinate responses without revealing their positions. Tactile communication systems used stone surfaces to transmit coded signals through vibrations that could travel through solid rock for miles. Underground cities developed early warning systems that could detect surface activity and alert defenders to potential threats long before actual penetration occurred. These systems monitored ground vibrations, air pressure changes, and even subtle shifts in underground water flow that might indicate surface excavation or the approach of large groups. The supply systems that supported underground defense were designed for extended siege conditions. Defensive positions included hidden caches of food, water, weapons, and other essential supplies that could sustain small groups of defenders for months. These caches were positioned to remain accessible even if main supply routes were compromised. The evacuation systems built into underground cities were as sophisticated as their defensive systems. Multiple escape routes led to distant surface exits, underwater passages, or connections to other underground facilities. These evacuation routes were designed to be undetectable from the main city areas, ensuring that even if the primary defensive systems failed, populations could escape to safety. The psychological training provided to potential defenders was comprehensive, preparing them for the unique stresses of underground combat. Defenders learned to fight effectively in complete darkness, navigate complex tunnel systems under stress, and maintain calm during the claustrophobic conditions that could panic inexperienced fighters. The weapon systems developed for underground combat were specifically adapted to the constraints of subterranean warfare. Crossbows were preferred over swords in narrow passages. Specialized spears were designed for fighting in confined spaces. And defensive weapons were created that could be used effectively from concealed positions. The medical systems that supported underground defense included specialized knowledge for treating injuries common in subterranean combat. Underground physicians developed techniques for treating crushing injuries, smoke inhalation, and the psychological trauma that could result from extended combat in confined, dark spaces. The intelligence systems used in underground cities were remarkably advanced for their time. Networks of observers monitored surface activities, tracked the movements of potential threats, and maintained detailed knowledge about the capabilities and intentions of various military forces that might pose risks to underground communities. The camouflage systems used to hide evidence of underground cities were comprehensive and effective. Surface areas above underground facilities were carefully maintained to appear natural or abandoned, with vegetation patterns and surface features designed to conceal the sophisticated infrastructure beneath. Modern military analysts studying these ancient defensive systems often express amazement at their sophistication and effectiveness. Computer modeling of underground defensive layouts reveals tactical advantages that match or exceed contemporary underground military installations. The psychological warfare aspects of these systems demonstrate understanding of human psychology that wouldn't be formally recognized in military doctrine for many centuries. The integration of defensive systems with daily life in underground cities was seamless and comprehensive. Defensive features were built into residential areas, workshops, and common spaces in ways that didn't interfere with normal activities, but could be rapidly activated during emergencies. Every community member understood their role in defensive operations and could contribute to community protection even without formal military training. The maintenance systems that kept defensive installations operational across generations were rigorous and comprehensive. Regular inspections, testing, and updates ensured that mechanical systems remained functional, supply caches stayed fresh, and communication networks operated effectively. This maintenance was treated as essential community responsibility, with specialized roles for individuals who maintained different aspects of defensive systems. The training systems that prepared new generations for defensive responsibilities were comprehensive educational programs that combined practical skills with historical knowledge and strategic understanding. Young people learned not just how to operate defensive systems, but why they were necessary and how they fit into the larger survival strategies of underground communities. The coordination systems that linked defensive operations across multiple underground cities were sophisticated communication networks that could coordinate responses to regional threats. These systems allowed scattered underground communities to share intelligence, coordinate defensive strategies, and provide mutual support during extended conflicts. The evolution of defensive systems over time shows continuous improvement and adaptation based on changing threats and accumulated experience. Archaeological evidence reveals multiple generations of defensive upgrades, with newer systems built to address weaknesses identified in earlier designs, or to counter new types of threats that emerged over time. The secrecy systems that protected knowledge about defensive capabilities were essential for maintaining their effectiveness. Information about defensive systems was carefully compartmentalized, with different individuals knowing only the aspects necessary for their specific roles. This ensured that even if some community members were captured or turned, the complete defensive capabilities would remain protected. The testing systems used to verify defensive effectiveness were comprehensive programs that regularly evaluated all aspects of underground protection. These tests included simulated attacks, evacuation drills, and systematic evaluation of all mechanical systems to ensure they would function properly during actual emergencies. The documentation systems that recorded defensive knowledge were carefully designed to preserve essential information while maintaining security. Technical knowledge was encoded in ways that would be meaningless to outsiders, but could be interpreted by trained community members. This documentation ensured that defensive capabilities could be maintained and improved even across generational transitions. As modern researchers study these ancient defensive systems, they discover innovations that remain relevant for contemporary security challenges. The psychological warfare techniques, environmental manipulation methods, and integrated defense concepts developed in underground cities offer insights that continue to influence modern military and security planning. The legacy of underground defensive systems extended far beyond their immediate military applications. The engineering techniques, organizational methods, and strategic thinking that went into these systems influenced Chinese military doctrine for centuries, contributing to defensive strategies that shaped the course of Chinese history long after the underground cities themselves were abandoned. In the deepest defensive chambers of these underground cities, where the most sensitive security systems were located, modern researchers continue to discover innovations that challenge our understanding of ancient military capabilities. These hidden fortifications reveal not just tactical sophistication, but strategic thinking that recognize the fundamental advantages of invisible strength over visible power. The defensive systems of China's underground cities represent one of humanity's most sophisticated approaches to asymmetric warfare, demonstrating how relatively small communities could defend themselves against vastly superior forces through superior planning, environmental knowledge, and psychological understanding. These ancient innovations continue to offer valuable lessons for modern security challenges, proving that the greatest defenses are often the ones that remain completely hidden until the moment they're needed. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of these defensive systems wasn't their military effectiveness, but their integration with peaceful community life. These weren't fortress communities living under siege conditions, but thriving societies that had simply chosen to build their greatest strengths where no enemy could see them. In doing so, they created a model of security that prioritized protection over projection, survival over conquest, and wisdom over force. The cultural systems that flourished within these underground cities developed unique characteristics that reflected both the constraints and opportunities of subterranean life. Cut off from many surface traditions and customs, underground communities created new forms of artistic expression, social organization, and spiritual practice that were uniquely adapted to their hidden environment. Music in underground cities evolved in remarkable directions, taking advantage of the unique acoustic properties of carved stone chambers. Musicians learned to compose pieces that used natural echoes and resonances, creating harmonies that were impossible to achieve in surface environments. They developed instruments specifically designed for underground performance, creating sounds that could carry clearly through tunnel systems without becoming muddy or distorted. The musical traditions that emerged were often communal rather than performance-based, with entire communities participating in singing or rhythmic activities that served both entertainment and practical purposes. These musical gatherings helped maintain social cohesion during long periods of isolation and provided emotional release during stressful times when surface threats made normal activities impossible. Dance traditions in underground cities adapted to the spatial constraints of carved chambers, while taking advantage of the unique properties of stone floors and walls. Dancers learned to use touch and spatial relationships rather than visual spectacle, creating movement forms that could be appreciated even in limited lighting conditions. These dance traditions often incorporated practical movements related to underground work and survival skills, turning necessary activities into artistic expression. The storytelling traditions that developed in underground cities were particularly rich and sophisticated, serving multiple functions beyond simple entertainment. Stories preserved essential technical knowledge, historical information, and cultural values, while providing frameworks for teaching survival skills and community cooperation. The oral tradition became even more important in underground communities, where written materials were precious and vulnerable. Storytellers in underground cities developed specialized techniques for narrative performance in acoustic environments where normal voice projection might be difficult or dangerous. They learned to use whispers, controlled breathing, and strategic positioning to create intimate storytelling experiences that could engage audiences without compromising community security. The visual arts that emerged in underground cities were necessarily different from surface traditions, focusing on forms that could be appreciated in low-light conditions or through touch. Sculptors learned to create works that told stories through texture and form rather than color and fine detail. They developed techniques for creating art that served practical purposes while maintaining aesthetic value. The textile arts that flourished in underground communities were remarkable for their innovation and quality despite material constraints. Working with limited resources and alternative fibers, underground textile workers created fabrics and garments that were both functional and beautiful. They developed dyeing techniques using locally available materials and created patterns that reflected the unique aesthetic sensibilities of subterranean culture. The decorative arts in underground cities often incorporated practical elements, creating beauty while serving essential functions. Carved ventilation grills became artistic focal points, water channels were designed with aesthetic appeal, and storage systems were created that enhanced rather than detracted from living spaces. The culinary traditions that developed in underground cities were sophisticated adaptations that maximized flavor and nutrition within the constraints of limited ingredients and cooking methods. Underground chefs developed techniques for creating complex flavors using fermentation, smoking, and seasoning methods that worked within the constraints of underground kitchens. Food presentation in underground cities often emphasized textures, aromas, and temperatures rather than visual appeal, creating dining experiences that engaged senses other than sight. These culinary traditions often incorporated ceremonial elements that reinforced community bonds and cultural values while providing practical nutrition. The games and recreational activities that emerged in underground cities were designed to provide entertainment while teaching practical skills and maintaining physical fitness in confined spaces. Many games incorporated elements of navigation, problem-solving, and teamwork that directly supported survival capabilities while providing enjoyable social activities. Children's games in underground cities were particularly sophisticated, combining play with essential education about underground living. Games taught spatial memory, developed tactile sensitivity, and reinforced safety procedures while providing the physical activity and social interaction necessary for healthy child development. The ceremonial and ritual traditions that developed in underground cities reflected the unique spiritual challenges and opportunities of subterranean life. These communities created new forms of religious and ceremonial expression that found sacred meaning in darkness, depth, and the hidden aspects of existence that surface communities often ignored. Coming-of-age ceremonies in underground cities often involved tests and challenges specifically related to subterranean survival skills. Young people demonstrated their readiness for adult responsibilities by showing mastery of navigation, problem-solving, and community cooperation skills that were essential for underground life. Marriage and family ceremonies in underground cities adapted traditional Chinese customs to the constraints and opportunities of subterranean communities. These ceremonies often emphasized community support and practical partnership while maintaining cultural connections to surface traditions and values. Death and burial customs in underground cities required significant adaptation due to space constraints and practical considerations. These communities developed respectful and meaningful approaches to honoring deceased community members while addressing the practical challenges of burial in confined underground spaces. The seasonal celebrations that marked time in underground cities were necessarily different from surface agricultural festivals, creating new traditions that reflected the rhythms of underground life rather than surface weather patterns. These celebrations helped maintain community morale and cultural continuity while adapting to the unique temporal experience of subterranean communities. The educational systems that supported cultural transmission in underground cities were comprehensive programs that ensured essential knowledge and values were passed from one generation to the next. These educational systems combined practical skill training with cultural education, ensuring that young people understood both how to survive in underground conditions and why their communities had chosen this way of life. The language and communication systems that developed in underground cities often included specialized vocabularies and communication methods that reflected the unique aspects of subterranean life. These linguistic developments helped reinforce community identity while providing practical tools for communication in challenging underground environments. The social organization systems that governed underground communities were sophisticated adaptations of traditional Chinese social structures that address the unique challenges and opportunities of subterranean life. These systems balanced individual needs with community survival requirements while maintaining cultural values and social cohesion. The conflict resolution systems used in underground cities were particularly important, given the potential for interpersonal tensions in confined living conditions. These communities developed effective methods for managing disputes and maintaining harmony while ensuring that conflicts didn't compromise community security or survival. The leadership systems that guided underground cities were often more democratic and consultative than surface political structures, reflecting the reality that successful underground communities required high levels of cooperation and shared responsibility. Leaders were typically chosen based on practical skills and community trust, rather than hereditary status or political connections. As modern researchers study the cultural systems that flourished in underground cities, they discover rich traditions that challenge assumptions about the relationship between environmental constraints and cultural creativity. These hidden communities created sophisticated cultural systems that were not diminished by their underground environment, but were uniquely enhanced by the creative challenges and opportunities it provided. The cultural legacy of China's underground cities extends far beyond their immediate historical context, influencing Chinese cultural development in ways that are still being discovered and understood. These hidden communities created innovations in art, music, social organization, and spiritual practice that enriched Chinese civilization. while remaining largely invisible to surface societies. In the carved chambers where these cultural traditions flourished, modern researchers find evidence of human creativity and adaptability that transcends environmental limitations. The underground cities preserved not just technical knowledge and survival skills, but entire alternative approaches to cultural life that offer valuable insights into the full range of human cultural possibility. The story of these cultural systems reminds us that human creativity and cultural expression can flourish under the most challenging conditions, and that some of humanity's most remarkable cultural achievements may have occurred in places where the outside world never knew to look for them. The spiritual dimensions of life in these underground cities developed in ways that would have been impossible on the surface. Separated from the natural cycles of sun and moon, from the familiar rhythms of seasonal change, these communities were forced to discover new ways of connecting with the sacred, the eternal, the mysteries that give meaning to human existence. In the deepest chambers, far below even the residential areas and workshops, archaeologists have discovered spaces that can only be described as underground temples. But these weren't replicas of surface religious architecture. They were something entirely new, spaces carved specifically to take advantage of the unique properties of subterranean environments. These temple chambers were positioned at precise locations within the underground cities, often at the convergence of multiple tunnel systems or above underground water sources. The positioning wasn't accidental, but reflected sophisticated understanding of acoustic principles, airflow patterns, and the subtle energies that ancient Chinese spiritual traditions recognized within the earth itself. The acoustic properties of these temple spaces were extraordinary. Whispered prayers could be heard clearly throughout chambers the size of cathedral naves. Chanted invocations would resonate through stone walls in ways that created harmonic frequencies not found in surface architecture. Some chambers were designed so that multiple voices singing in different locations would combine into complex harmonies that seemed to emerge from the stone itself. The lighting systems developed for these spiritual spaces pushed the boundaries of what was possible with ancient technology. Beyond the sophisticated mirror and crystal arrangements found elsewhere in the cities, temple chambers featured lighting systems that seemed to create illumination from within the stone itself. Careful placement of reflective materials and strategic carving created effects where light appeared to emanate from carved religious symbols and decorative elements. But perhaps most remarkably, some temple chambers incorporated bioluminescent elements that created ethereal lighting effects impossible to achieve on the surface. Carefully cultivated colonies of luminescent organisms were integrated into the architecture itself, creating walls and ceiling elements that glowed with soft, living light that changed subtly over time, creating an atmosphere of organic spirituality that connected worshippers directly to the living processes of the earth. The water features incorporated into these underground temples were masterpieces of hydraulic engineering that served both practical and spiritual purposes. Underground streams were channeled through temple chambers in patterns that created specific sound effects, from gentle whispers to powerful rushing sounds that could induce meditative states or provide acoustic masking for private prayers and confessions. Some temple chambers featured sacred pools fed by underground springs, where the water temperature remained constant year-round, regardless of surface weather conditions. These pools were used for purification ceremonies, healing rituals, and baptismal rites that marked important transitions in community members' spiritual lives. The carved religious artwork found in these underground temples represents some of the most sophisticated stone carving discovered anywhere in ancient China. Working entirely by touch and limited light, artisans created religious sculptures and relief carvings of extraordinary beauty and precision. These works often incorporated natural rock formations into their design, treating the living stone as a collaborative partner in creating sacred art. The symbolic systems used in underground religious art were uniquely adapted to subterranean spirituality. Traditional Chinese religious symbols were reinterpreted to reflect the underground environment, with imagery that emphasized depth, hidden knowledge, and the sacred aspects of darkness and earth. Dragons were depicted as guardians of underground realms. Phoenixes were shown emerging from stone rather than fire, and traditional landscape elements were reimagined as underground vistas. The meditation practices that developed in these underground temples were specifically designed for the unique conditions of subterranean spiritual life. Practitioners learned techniques that used the natural silence and darkness of underground spaces to achieve states of consciousness that were difficult or impossible to reach on the surface. These meditation techniques often incorporated the physical properties of underground environments. Practitioners learned to use the constant temperature and humidity of underground chambers to regulate their breathing and body temperature. They developed methods that used the subtle vibrations transmitted through stone to achieve synchronization between their heartbeat and the natural rhythms of the earth itself. The community's spiritual practices that emerged in underground cities were necessarily more intimate and participatory than surface religious ceremonies. Without the grandeur of large temples or elaborate religious pageantry, underground communities developed spiritual traditions that emphasize personal connection, community support, and direct experience of the sacred. Prayer circles in underground temples often involve the entire community, with participants arranged in patterns that took advantage of the acoustic properties of carved chambers. These communal prayers created sound experiences that were both deeply personal and profoundly communal, binding communities together through shared spiritual experience in ways that strengthen social bonds essential for underground survival. The seasonal spiritual observances practiced in underground cities had to be completely reimagined, since traditional agricultural festivals based on surface weather patterns had no meaning in the constant environment of underground chambers. These communities developed new spiritual calendars based on underground phenomena. The seasonal changes in underground water levels, the subtle variations in air pressure and humidity, and the community's own cycles of work and rest. These underground spiritual calendars often incorporated astronomical observations made through carefully positioned observation shafts that connected deep chambers to the surface. These shafts allowed communities to maintain connection with celestial cycles while remaining hidden underground, creating spiritual practices that bridge the gap between earth and sky, hidden and revealed, depth and height. The healing traditions that developed in underground temple spaces were remarkable for their integration of spiritual and medical practices. Healers learned to use the unique properties of underground environments for therapeutic purposes, combining traditional Chinese medicine with innovations that were only possible in subterranean conditions. The constant temperature and humidity of underground chambers created ideal conditions for certain types of healing practices. Respiratory ailments could be treated using the naturally purified air of deep chambers. Joint and muscle problems responded well to the consistent environmental conditions that eliminated the stress of temperature and weather changes. But beyond these physical benefits, underground healing traditions incorporated spiritual elements that treated illness as disconnection from the deeper rhythms of earth and community. Healing ceremonies often involved extended stays in the deepest, most sacred chambers, where patients could reconnect with the fundamental energies that underground communities believed flowed through the living rock itself. The death and afterlife beliefs that developed in underground cities were profoundly influenced by their subterranean environment. Rather than viewing death as a journey to heaven or other celestial realms, underground communities developed spiritual concepts that emphasized return to the earth, integration with the living stone, and continuation of existence within the deep places where their communities had found sanctuary. Burial practices in underground cities were necessarily different from surface customs, but they weren't diminished by practical constraints. Instead, these communities developed burial traditions that treated the surrounding stone as sacred ground, incorporating deceased community members into the very foundations of their underground homes. Bodies were placed in specially carved chambers that became permanent parts of the city's architecture, allowing the dead to continue participating in community life as guardians and spiritual presences. These burial chambers were often integrated into the temple areas, creating ancestor shrines where community members could maintain ongoing relationships with deceased relatives and community leaders. The constant temperature and low oxygen conditions of deep underground chambers naturally preserved bodies and burial goods, creating ancestor shrines that remained intact for centuries. The initiation ceremonies that marked spiritual advancement in underground communities were specifically designed to test and develop the psychological and spiritual qualities necessary for subterranean life. These ceremonies often involved extended periods alone in the deepest chambers, where initiates had to demonstrate their ability to maintain mental equilibrium in complete darkness and silence. Advanced spiritual practitioners in underground cities developed techniques for extending consciousness beyond the physical boundaries of their hidden communities, using meditation methods that took advantage of the sensory deprivation possible in deep underground chambers. These practitioners claimed to be able to project their awareness to distant locations, communicate with other underground communities, and access spiritual knowledge that transcended the limitations of their physical environment. The theological systems that emerged from centuries of underground spiritual practice were sophisticated philosophical frameworks that addressed fundamental questions about the relationship between surface and depth, visible and hidden, temporary and eternal. These theological concepts influenced Chinese spiritual thought in ways that extended far beyond the underground cities themselves. Underground theological traditions often emphasize the spiritual value of hiddenness, treating concealment not as shame or weakness, but as a form of spiritual discipline that brought practitioners closer to ultimate truth. These concepts influenced Chinese spiritual traditions that valued humility, discretion, and the cultivation of inner strength over external display. The prophetic traditions that developed in underground cities often focused on visions of eventual return to the surface, but not as retreat or defeat. These prophetic visions described underground communities eventually emerging to share their accumulated wisdom with surface civilizations that had lost essential knowledge during periods of chaos and destruction. These prophetic traditions maintained hope and purpose within underground communities that might otherwise have despaired of their hidden existence. They provided spiritual frameworks that treated underground life not as permanent exile, but as preparation for future service to humanity's broader spiritual development. The mystical practices that flourished in the deepest temple chambers of underground cities pushed the boundaries of human spiritual experience. Practitioners developed techniques for achieving states of consciousness that seemed to transcend normal human limitations, accessing knowledge and awareness that came from sources beyond ordinary perception. These mystical traditions often incorporated the physical properties of deep underground environments in ways that enhanced spiritual practice. The natural silence eliminated external distractions. The constant darkness removed visual stimulation that could interfere with inner vision. The stable temperature and humidity created ideal conditions for extended meditation and contemplation. Advanced practitioners claimed to be able to communicate directly with the consciousness of the earth itself, accessing geological knowledge, predicting underground water sources, and understanding structural properties of rock formations through spiritual rather than technical means. Whether these abilities were genuine or simply represented sophisticated intuitive knowledge accumulated through generations of underground living, they became important elements of underground spiritual traditions. The integration of spiritual practice with practical underground survival created unique religious traditions that treated daily activities as forms of spiritual discipline. Water management became a form of sacred service. Tunnel maintenance was performed as spiritual practice. Food preparation was elevated to ceremonial significance. This integration meant that every aspect of underground life had spiritual dimensions, creating communities where there was no separation between sacred and secular activities. Work was worship, survival was spiritual practice, and community cooperation was the highest form of religious observance. The preservation of spiritual knowledge in underground cities followed the same sophisticated systems used for technical and cultural information. Spiritual teachings were encoded into architectural features, carved into stone surfaces, using symbolic systems that protected sacred knowledge while making it accessible to trained practitioners. These spiritual preservation systems ensured that religious knowledge could survive even if written records were lost, or communities were forced to abandon their underground homes temporarily. The cities themselves became sacred texts, where spiritual teachings were permanently inscribed in stone, waiting for future generations who might need the wisdom accumulated through centuries of hidden spiritual practice. The influence of underground spiritual traditions on surface Chinese religion was subtle but significant. Many practices that appeared in later Chinese spiritual traditions can be traced to innovations that first developed in underground communities. Meditation techniques, healing practices, and theological concepts that emphasize the spiritual value of hiddenness and depth all show influences that suggest connection to underground spiritual traditions. As modern researchers study the spiritual dimensions of China's underground cities, they discover religious innovations that challenge conventional understanding of ancient Chinese spirituality. These hidden communities developed spiritual practices that were not diminished by their separation from surface religious institutions, but were uniquely enhanced by the creative opportunities provided by their underground environment. The spiritual legacy of China's underground cities extends far beyond their immediate historical context, contributing to Chinese spiritual development in ways that are still being discovered and understood. These hidden communities created innovations in religious practice, theological thought, and mystical technique that enriched Chinese civilization while remaining largely invisible to surface societies. In the deepest temple chambers of these underground cities, where spiritual practices developed in complete separation from surface religious traditions, modern researchers find evidence of human spiritual creativity that transcends environmental limitations. These hidden communities created sophisticated spiritual systems that offer valuable insights into the full range of human religious possibility. The story of underground spiritual traditions reminds us that human connection to the sacred can flourish under any conditions, and that some of humanity's most profound spiritual achievements may have occurred in places where the outside world never knew to look for them. In the silence and darkness of carved stone temples, where underground communities gathered to connect with mysteries deeper than the earth itself, the human spirit found ways to touch the eternal that were as beautiful and profound as any spiritual tradition that ever reached toward the light. These underground spiritual systems created alternative approaches to the sacred that emphasized depth over height, hiddenness over display, and inner transformation over external ritual. In doing so, they contributed to humanity's understanding of the many paths that can lead to spiritual truth, proving that the sacred can be found not just in reaching toward heaven, but in descending deep enough into the earth to discover the divine that dwells in darkness, waiting patiently for those brave enough to seek it in places where others fear to look. The seasonal rhythms that governed life in these underground cities created entirely new relationships with time itself. Cut off from the natural cycles that had regulated human activity for millennia, these communities were forced to discover alternative ways of marking the passage of days, months, and years that gave structure and meaning to their hidden existence. Without sunrise and sunset to mark the boundaries of each day, underground communities developed sophisticated timekeeping systems based on subtle environmental changes that were invisible to surface dwellers. They learned to read the minute variations in air pressure that indicated weather changes above ground. They tracked the seasonal fluctuations in underground water levels that reflected surface rainfall patterns. They monitored the barely perceptible temperature changes that penetrated even into the deepest chambers. These environmental timekeeping methods were supplemented by mechanical systems that represented remarkable innovations in ancient Chinese technology. Water clocks using controlled drip systems could maintain accurate time measurement for weeks without adjustment. Candle clocks made from specially formulated wax burned at consistent rates, regardless of humidity or air circulation variations. Sand timers using precisely graded particles provided reliable measurement of shorter time periods. But beyond these practical timekeeping needs, underground communities created entirely new concepts of seasonal celebration that reflected their unique relationship with the earth. Instead of agricultural festivals celebrating planting and harvest, they developed observances that honored the deeper rhythms of geological time, the slow processes of stone formation and water flow that operated on scales far longer than human lifespans. These geological festivals created spiritual connections between human community life and the vast timescales of Earth processes. Celebrations might mark the annual peak flow of underground streams, the seasonal changes in mineral deposits that colored underground pools, or the subtle shifts in air currents that indicated changing weather patterns hundreds of feet above. The work rhythms that developed in underground cities were necessarily different from surface agricultural cycles. Without the pressure of seasonal planting and harvesting, underground communities could organize their activities around patterns that maximized efficiency and community well-being rather than external environmental demands. These alternative work patterns often proved superior to surface agricultural rhythms. Underground workshops could maintain consistent production schedules year-round. Craft specialists could focus on developing their skills without interruption from seasonal agricultural duties. Community projects could be planned and executed on timescales that prioritized quality and thoroughness over seasonal deadlines. The social rhythms that governed underground community life were equally innovative. Without the traditional Chinese calendar of festivals and observances, underground communities created new social cycles that strengthened community bonds while providing variety and interest in what could otherwise become monotonous underground existence. These social cycles often incorporated rotation systems that ensured every community member experienced variety in their daily activities. Individuals might spend periods focused on different types of work, participate in different social groups, or take turns assuming various community responsibilities. These rotation systems prevented the social stagnation that could develop in small, isolated communities, while ensuring that essential skills and knowledge were distributed throughout the population. The educational rhythms developed in underground cities were particularly sophisticated, creating learning systems that could maintain high educational standards while adapting to the constraints of underground life. Without access to traditional Chinese educational institutions, underground communities developed comprehensive educational programs that often exceeded the quality of surface education. These educational systems often operated on longer cycles that allowed for deep mastery of essential skills. Students might spend months or years focused intensively on specific subjects, developing expertise that would be impossible to achieve in surface educational systems that required broader but shallower coverage of multiple topics simultaneously. The emotional rhythms that sustained psychological health in underground communities were carefully cultivated through community activities and individual practices that addressed the unique stresses of subterranean life. Without natural light and seasonal changes to regulate mood and energy levels, underground communities developed alternative approaches to maintaining emotional well-being. These emotional support systems often incorporated group activities that provided psychological benefits impossible to achieve individually. Community singing sessions that took advantage of underground acoustics created shared emotional experiences that strengthened social bonds. Group meditation practices that used the natural silence of underground chambers provided stress relief and spiritual nourishment. Communal storytelling sessions that preserved cultural knowledge also provided emotional connection to larger human narratives that transcended immediate underground circumstances. The creative rhythms that sustained artistic and intellectual development in underground cities were remarkable for their intensity and focus. Without external distractions and with consistent environmental conditions, underground communities often achieved levels of creative productivity that exceeded what was possible in surface environments. These creative cycles often incorporated extended periods of focused work, alternating with periods of reflection and evaluation. Artisans might spend months perfecting specific techniques, then share their innovations with the entire community before beginning new creative projects. Scholars might devote years to studying particular subjects, then teach their accumulated knowledge to ensure it was preserved and transmitted to future generations. The maintenance rhythms that kept underground cities functioning were comprehensive systems that ensured every aspect of the complex underground infrastructure received appropriate attention. Without the seasonal maintenance cycles used in surface communities, underground cities developed maintenance schedules based on the actual needs of their sophisticated technical systems. These maintenance systems often incorporated community-wide activities that combined necessary work with social interaction and skill development. Tunnel cleaning might become community gatherings that strengthened social bonds while ensuring infrastructure remained functional. Ventilation system maintenance might provide opportunities for technical training while maintaining essential life support systems. The healing rhythms developed in underground medical systems were adapted to the unique health challenges and opportunities of subterranean life. Without seasonal disease patterns or agricultural work injuries, underground communities developed medical practices that address the specific health issues that arose in their environment, while taking advantage of the healing opportunities that underground conditions provided. These healing systems often incorporated extended treatment cycles that took advantage of the stable conditions and reduced stress of underground environments. Patients with chronic conditions might receive months of consistent treatment without the interruptions and environmental stresses that complicated surface medical care. Mental health treatment could incorporate the natural sensory deprivation and reduced stimulation of underground environments in ways that enhanced therapeutic effectiveness. The communication rhythms that maintained connections between different sections of underground cities and different underground communities were sophisticated systems that ensured essential information flowed efficiently while maintaining security. These communication systems often operated on schedules that balanced the need for information exchange with the requirements of maintaining secrecy and security. Regular communication cycles might involve scheduled messenger services between different underground locations, coordinated signal systems that could transmit simple messages across great distances, and periodic gatherings where representatives from different communities could exchange information and coordinate activities. The renewal rhythms that prevented underground communities from becoming stagnant or losing connection to the broader human experience were carefully planned activities that brought new ideas, skills, and perspectives into underground life. These renewal systems often incorporated controlled contact with surface communities, integration of new members who brought fresh perspectives, and internal innovation programs that encouraged community members to develop new approaches to underground living. These renewal cycles ensured that underground communities remained dynamic and adaptive, rather than becoming isolated and unchanging. They provided mechanisms for incorporating beneficial innovations while maintaining the core values and survival strategies that made underground life successful. The memory rhythms that preserved and transmitted essential knowledge across generations in underground communities were comprehensive systems that ensured cultural and technical knowledge survived, even if written records were lost or communities were forced to relocate. These memory systems often incorporated regular recitation cycles, storytelling schedules, and skill demonstration programs that kept essential knowledge active and accessible. These memory preservation systems often made knowledge transmission into community entertainment and social activities. Technical knowledge might be preserved through songs that made complex procedures memorable. Historical information might be maintained through dramatic performances that engaged community members, while ensuring accurate transmission of important events and lessons. As modern researchers study the temporal systems that governed life in China's underground cities, they discover innovative approaches to organizing human activity that challenge conventional assumptions about the relationship between natural cycles and social organization. These hidden communities created alternative temporal frameworks that were not diminished by their separation from surface seasonal patterns, but were uniquely enhanced by the creative opportunities provided by their underground environment. The temporal legacy of China's underground cities extends far beyond their immediate historical context, contributing to Chinese cultural development in ways that influenced approaches to time, work, and social organization that can still be traced in contemporary Chinese society. These hidden communities created innovations in temporal organization that enriched human understanding of the many ways that time can be structured to support community life and individual development. In the chambers where these alternative temporal systems operated for centuries, modern researchers find evidence of human creativity and adaptability that transcends environmental limitations. The underground cities preserve not just technical knowledge and survival skills, but entire alternative approaches to organizing human activity in time that offer valuable insights into the full range of human temporal possibility. The story of underground temporal systems reminds us that human communities can create meaningful relationships with time under any circumstances, and that some of humanity's most innovative approaches to temporal organization may have developed in places where conventional time markers were absent, forcing communities to discover deeper, more fundamental rhythms that connected human activity to the eternal processes that govern life itself. Now, as we reach the end of our journey through these hidden realms, we find ourselves standing at the threshold between two worlds. Above us, the weight of centuries presses down through layers of earth and stone. Below us, the carved chambers stretch away into darkness that holds secrets we may never fully understand. These underground cities of ancient China represent something far more profound than mere survival shelters or storage facilities. They represent humanity's remarkable ability to adapt, to innovate, and to create entire civilizations in places where others saw only empty darkness. The evidence continues to emerge from beneath China's modern cities and industrial developments. Construction projects regularly break through into chambers that haven't been opened since the Tang dynasty. Archaeological surveys using ground-penetrating radar reveal underground complexes that dwarf anything we've previously discovered. And in the deepest levels, where modern technology finally allows us to explore spaces that have remained sealed for over a millennium, we find innovations that challenge everything we thought we knew about ancient capabilities. Perhaps what's most remarkable about these discoveries is how they force us to reconsider the entire narrative of human technological development. We've been taught to think of progress as a steady upward climb, with each generation building upon the achievements of the last. But the underground cities of China suggest a different pattern, one where sophisticated knowledge and advanced techniques were developed, mastered, and then deliberately hidden away, preserved in stone chambers for future generations, who might desperately need the wisdom of the past. The thermal regulation systems found in the deepest chambers reveal understanding of physics principles that weren't formally recognized in Western science until the Industrial Revolution. The acoustic engineering that created perfect communication networks across miles of underground tunnels demonstrates mathematical precision that rivals modern audio engineering. The water purification methods that kept underground communities healthy using only naturally available materials often proved more effective than contemporary surface techniques. But beyond the technical innovations, these underground cities preserved something even more valuable. They demonstrated that human communities could thrive under conditions that seemed impossible, that creativity and culture could flourish in environments that challenged every assumption about what humans needed to live fulfilling lives. In chambers carved from solid rock, by the light of oil lamps and bioluminescent organisms, people created art, music, literature, and spiritual traditions that were as rich and meaningful as anything produced in the great surface cities of their time. The children who grew to adulthood in these underground realms knew a world that surface dwellers could barely imagine. Yet their lives were not diminished by the constraints of their environment. Instead, they developed capabilities and perspectives that often exceeded those of their surface contemporaries. They understood cooperation and community interdependence in ways that surface societies, with their emphasis on individual achievement and competition, rarely achieved. The social innovations that emerged from underground community life offer lessons that remain relevant for contemporary challenges. How do you maintain individual identity within communities that depend absolutely on cooperation for survival? How do you resolve conflicts when physical separation is impossible? How do you maintain hope and purpose when the outside world seems hostile or threatening? The underground cities of China developed practical answers to these questions that were tested and refined across centuries of successful community life. The environmental technologies pioneered in these underground cities are particularly relevant as modern societies face challenges of sustainability and resource management. The closed-loop systems that recycled air, water, and nutrients with minimal waste demonstrate principles that contemporary green technology is only beginning to rediscover. The renewable energy systems that use geothermal heat, controlled airflow, and biological processes to power underground communities offer models for sustainable living that don't depend on external energy sources. The food production systems developed in underground cities combined innovative agriculture with sophisticated preservation techniques that could maintain nutrition and food security for large populations using minimal resources. These systems often proved more reliable and productive than surface agriculture, which was vulnerable to weather, warfare, and seasonal variations that could cause famine and malnutrition. The medical knowledge preserved in underground cities included treatments and techniques that were often more advanced than surface medicine. Working with limited resources and facing unique health challenges, underground physicians developed expertise that led to innovations in surgery, pharmacy, and psychological treatment that wouldn't appear in surface medical traditions for centuries. The educational systems that flourished in underground cities produced individuals with knowledge and skills that often surpassed what was available through surface educational institutions. The combination of practical training, intellectual development, and cultural preservation created comprehensive educational programs that prepared students not just for professional specialization, but for the full range of challenges they might face in life. As modern China continues to develop extensive underground infrastructure for transportation, commerce, and strategic purposes, the connection to these ancient traditions becomes increasingly apparent. The engineering techniques, organizational methods, and design principles that made ancient underground cities successful continue to influence contemporary underground construction projects. Modern Chinese engineers working on subway systems, underground shopping complexes, and strategic facilities draw upon institutional knowledge that has been accumulated across more than 2 millennia of underground development. The psychological and social insights developed through centuries of underground community life remain relevant for contemporary challenges ranging from space exploration to sustainable urban planning. Understanding how human communities can maintain health, creativity, and social cohesion in enclosed environments has applications that extend far beyond archaeological interest. The preservation techniques that kept essential knowledge and cultural traditions alive through centuries of political upheaval and social change offer models for maintaining institutional memory and cultural continuity in rapidly changing modern societies. The methods developed for encoding complex information in durable physical formats provide insights for long-term data preservation that remain valuable for contemporary information management challenges. But perhaps the most important legacy of China's underground cities is the demonstration that human adaptability and creativity have no limits. When faced with challenges that seemed impossible to overcome, these communities didn't just survive, they thrived. They created new forms of art, new approaches to social organization, new technologies, and new spiritual traditions that enriched human civilization in ways that are still being discovered and appreciated. The story of these underground cities reminds us that the greatest human achievements are not always the most visible ones. The pyramids of Egypt and the Great Wall of China command attention because they reach toward the sky, proclaiming their builders' power and ambition for all the world to see. But the underground cities of China achieved something equally remarkable through opposite means. They created lasting monuments to human ingenuity and determination that were designed never to be seen, never to be celebrated, never to be conquered. In choosing invisibility over display, depth over height, permanence over recognition, the builders of these underground cities created a different kind of legacy. They proved that the most enduring strength often comes from remaining hidden, that the greatest security lies not in walls that keep enemies out, but in spaces that enemies never know exist, and that the most valuable treasures are not those that glitter in the light, but those that wait patiently in darkness for the moment when they're truly needed. As we drift towards sleep, carried along by the gentle current of these ancient stories, we can imagine ourselves walking through stone corridors that echo with 2,000 years of whispered conversations. We can picture the soft glow of oil lamps reflecting off polished stone walls, the sound of underground streams flowing through channels carved by patient hands, the voices of children learning songs that preserved essential knowledge in melodies that could survive even if written records were lost. In these final moments of our journey, we find ourselves not at an ending, but at a beginning, because the story of China's underground cities is still being written. Somewhere beneath the modern cities and industrial developments of contemporary China, in chambers that modern technology is only beginning to reveal, that story continues. New chapters are being carved into living stone by people who understand that the greatest achievements are often the ones that remain forever hidden, waiting in silence for future generations who will need the wisdom, the courage, and the unshakable determination of those who chose to build their cities in the darkness, where no enemy could find them and no conqueror could claim them. The underground cities of ancient China stand as eternal testimony to the power of human ingenuity, the strength that comes from community cooperation, and the profound truth that the most lasting victories are won not through conquest, but through survival, not through display, but through persistence, and not through reaching toward the light, but through finding ways to create light in places where others see only darkness. And so we arrive at the deepest mystery of all. After walking through centuries of hidden chambers, after exploring the ingenuity of ancient engineers and the resilience of underground communities, we're left with a question that modern archaeology has never been able to answer definitively. Why did these remarkable civilizations choose to hide their greatest achievements beneath the earth? The conventional explanation speaks of warfare and survival, of populations seeking shelter from invading armies and political upheaval. But the evidence suggests something far more profound. These weren't temporary refugees hastily carved in times of crisis. They were permanent alternative societies, designed from the beginning to exist parallel to surface civilization, while remaining completely invisible to it. Consider the implications of this choice. In a culture that valued hierarchy, status, and the display of power through magnificent architecture, entire communities chose anonymity. In a society where historical records and monuments proclaimed the achievements of rulers and dynasties, these underground builders left no inscriptions claiming credit for their work. They created marvels of engineering that rivaled anything built above ground, yet designed them to be seen by no one except those who lived within them. This suggests a philosophy of power and achievement that was fundamentally different from what we see in surface civilizations. These underground communities understood something that most human societies have forgotten. True strength doesn't need to announce itself. Real security doesn't depend on intimidating others. Lasting achievement doesn't require recognition or fame. The underground cities were built by people who measured success not by what others could see, but by what they could preserve. Not by how high they could build, but by how deep they could sustain life. Not by how much territory they could conquer, but by how completely they could disappear when necessary. This philosophy of invisible strength may be the most important legacy these ancient communities left behind. In our modern world, where everything is documented, broadcast, and shared instantly across global networks, the idea of deliberately hiding achievement seems almost impossible to comprehend. We live in an age of constant visibility, where success is measured by metrics, recognition, and public acknowledgement. But the underground cities of China offer a different model. They demonstrate that some of humanity's greatest accomplishments may be the ones that are never seen, never celebrated, never even known to exist. They suggest that the most valuable knowledge might be the kind that is preserved in silence, waiting for future generations who will need it more than the present generation needs the credit for creating it. As modern technology continues to reveal new chambers, new tunnels, new evidence of sophisticated underground networks that span entire provinces, we're forced to confront the possibility that much of what we think we know about ancient Chinese civilization may be incomplete. The visible monuments, the recorded histories, the celebrated achievements of emperors and dynasties may represent only the surface layer of a much deeper and more complex civilization. Beneath the familiar story of rising and falling dynasties, of wars and conquests and political intrigue, there may have existed an entirely parallel civilization, one that maintained continuity across political changes, that preserved knowledge through periods of chaos, that solved problems and developed technologies that surface societies couldn't imagine. This hidden civilization would have operated according to different principles than surface societies. Instead of competition for territory and resources, cooperation for mutual survival. Instead of hierarchy based on birth or conquest, organization based on practical skills and community contribution. Instead of wealth measured in gold and possessions, value determined by knowledge and the ability to preserve it. The more we learn about these underground cities, the more they challenge our fundamental assumptions about human nature and social organization. We're taught to believe that humans are naturally competitive, that societies inevitably develop hierarchies of power and wealth, that technological progress depends on the accumulation of resources and the specialization of labor. But the underground cities suggest that human communities can thrive using completely different organizational principles. They demonstrate that cooperation can be more effective than competition when survival depends on the success of the entire community. They show that knowledge and skills can be preserved and developed without the institutional structures that we think are necessary for technological advancement. Perhaps most remarkably, they prove that human creativity and cultural development can flourish in environments that seem to offer no advantages and every possible constraint. In spaces where there is no natural light, no connection to seasonal cycles, no access to the resources and trade networks that surface cities depend upon. These underground communities created art, music, literature, and spiritual traditions that were as sophisticated as anything produced above ground. This suggests that human potential is far less dependent on external circumstances than we usually assume. When people are committed to a common purpose, when they understand that their individual success depends entirely on the success of their community, when they accept that their greatest achievements may never be recognized or celebrated, they can accomplish things that seem impossible under normal circumstances. The underground cities of China stand as permanent monuments to this truth. Not monuments in the conventional sense, since they were designed never to be seen, but monuments nonetheless. Carved testimonies to human adaptability, creativity, and the power of communities united by shared purpose and mutual dependence. As we reach the end of our journey through these hidden realms, as we prepare to return to the surface world of visible achievements and recorded histories, we carry with us the knowledge that there is always more beneath the surface than what appears above it. The greatest stories may be the ones that are never told. The most important achievements may be the ones that remain forever hidden. And the most valuable wisdom may be the kind that waits patiently in darkness, preserved by communities who understood that some truths are too precious to be exposed to the harsh light of public scrutiny. In the silent chambers where these ancient communities once lived and worked and dreamed, where children learned to navigate by touch and adults developed senses that surface dwellers could never imagine, where knowledge was carved into stone walls and preserved in the memory palaces of human minds, the story continues. Not the story of what was lost, but the story of what was saved. Not the story of civilizations that fell, but the story of wisdom that endured. And in that endurance, in that patient preservation of human knowledge and capability across centuries of surface chaos and change, we find perhaps the most hopeful truth of all, that no matter how dark the times may seem, no matter how completely civilization may appear to collapse above ground, somewhere in the depths, in hidden chambers carved by patient hands and tended by communities who chose preservation over recognition, the light of human knowledge continues to burn. The underground cities of ancient China remind us that the human story is far richer, far more complex, and far more resilient than the visible record suggests. They tell us that some of our greatest achievements may be the ones we never hear about, preserved by people who understood that true success is measured not by fame or recognition, but by the simple fact of survival, by the continuation of knowledge, community, and hope through even the darkest periods of human history. As you drift into sleep, carried by these ancient currents of hidden wisdom, remember that beneath the surface of everything you see, there may be depths that hold secrets worth preserving. That the greatest strength often comes from remaining invisible. That the most valuable treasures are often the ones that wait in darkness. And that somewhere, in chambers carved from living stone by hands that worked not for glory, but for the future, the story of human persistence and ingenuity continues to unfold, one carefully preserved secret at a time. Sleep well, knowing that the darkness holds not emptiness, but possibility, not absence, but presence. Not the end of stories, but their eternal beginning, waiting patiently for those with courage enough to descend into the depths where the most important truths have always been hidden, preserved by communities who chose wisdom over recognition, depth over display, and the patient work of preservation over the fleeting satisfaction of fame. The underground cities of ancient China sleep beneath our feet, but they do not rest. They wait, as they have always waited, for the next generation to discover that the greatest achievements of human civilization may be the ones that were never meant to be found, but were always meant to endure.